My name is Elena Vance. I'm 29 years old, and on the last night of the year, I accepted a dinner invitation I should have thrown straight into the trash. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, expensive in that old money way people use when they want cruelty to look elegant. It arrived at my apartment in Boston with no handwritten note, no warmth, just a printed card inviting me to New Year's dinner at the family conservatory in Connecticut. I stared at it for a long time because my body remembered before my mind did. That house had a way of smiling at me while sharpening the knife behind its back. I told myself I didn't have to go. I told myself I was too busy, too tired, too old to keep walking into rooms where love always came with a performance review. But then I made the mistake I always made with them. I let one small, stupid piece of hope survive. Maybe this time they just wanted one peaceful dinner. Maybe this time I wouldn't be treated like the family defect wheeled out for comparison. Then I remembered being 23, standing in that same glass room while everyone toasted my sister's promotion, and my father casually asking me in front of 12 people whether digging through dead people's paperwork was a real career or a hobby I'd eventually outgrow. I still went. I put on a black dress, pinned my hair back, and drove through the cold with my jaw tight and one thought I couldn't shake. If they had invited me out of pity, then they had badly misjudged what I was still capable of carrying out of that house. Before I tell you what he said and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. By the time I pulled into the long gravel drive, the sky was already turning that dark blue winter color that makes expensive houses look theatrical. The conservatory sat off the main house like a jewel box built to impress strangers. All glass walls, iron beams, and soft golden light warming the rows of potted citrus trees inside. It should have looked beautiful. To me, it looked like a museum exhibit for every humiliation I had learned to swallow with a straight back. The second I stepped in, the scent hit me first. Orange peel, rosemary, candle wax, and the faint sharpness of polished wood. That smell dragged 100 bad memories behind it. I handed my coat to the staff, and before I could even fully settle into the room, I felt it. That familiar shift in the air when a family decides the outsider has arrived, and the evening can really begin. My father, Thomas Vance, stood near the head of the table with a tumbler in his hand, looking the way men like him always look when they've spent their whole lives confusing authority with character. Beside him was my younger sister, Sophia, draped in cream silk, glowing with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having to doubt your place in the room. She saw me first. Her smile appeared instantly, beautiful and poisonous. "Elena," she said, stretching my name just enough to turn it into a joke. "You actually came." Invitations usually imply that, I said, because I had learned long ago that in this family, if you didn't arrive armored in sarcasm, you arrived bleeding. My father gave me a slow once-over. Not crude, not obvious, he would never be that sloppy, just enough to remind me that in his mind I was still being assessed. "Good," he said. "For a moment, I thought Boston had finally taught you how to avoid unwinnable situations." That was his gift. He never shouted first. He preferred precision. Sophia laughed softly, like the line had earned it. Around them, a few of their guests smiled into their glasses and pretended not to notice what was happening. That was another Vance family specialty. Public cruelty cushioned by private manners. Dinner was arranged beautifully, of course. White linen, candlelight reflected in crystal, a long table that forced everyone to look toward its center, where my father sat like he was hosting a board meeting instead of a holiday meal. I took my seat and forced myself to inhale slowly. Why did I still do this to myself? Why was I still sitting down with people who had spent years treating every achievement of mine like a clerical error? But even as I asked myself that, I knew the answer. Because some wounds don't keep you trapped through pain. They keep you trapped through the memory of the tiny scraps of approval you keep believing might return if you just survive one more dinner. The first half hour moved the way these things always moved. Champagne, small talk, performative affection. Sophia described a campaign she'd just led for a luxury wellness brand. One of those companies that sells insecurity in prettier packaging. My father told the table how proud he was of her instincts, her polish, her understanding of value. Then his eyes slid to me. "And Elena," he said, lifting his glass, "still down in archives and attics, rescuing the reputations of dead collectors." A few people chuckled politely. I set down my fork and met his gaze. "Provenance research," I said. "It keeps museums from displaying stolen art and forged histories. So yes, still doing real work." Sophia tilted her head. "That always sounds noble when you say it fast." The laughter this time was lighter, easier. They were warming up. That's when I knew with total clarity that I hadn't been invited to reconnect. I had been invited to complete the arrangement. I was the contrast, the cautionary tale, the shadow that made Sophia shine harder. And the worst part was that under the table my hands were cold. Not because I was weak, but because some part of me still hated how easily they could pull me back into that old role. Why did I still have to smile when every nerve in my body wanted to stand up and walk out? Because I wasn't ready yet. Not until I knew exactly how much they still thought they owned. The real cruelty began with dessert, because by then my father had enough wine in his system to enjoy himself, and enough of an audience to want to perform. A dark chocolate tart was placed in front of us. And Sophia had just finished a story about some private client weekend in Vermont when my father leaned back in his chair and looked directly at me. "You know," he said, "we only invited you out of pity. I told Sophia it would look bad if we started the year without including you at least once." Silence hit the table first, sharp, stunned, then immediately covered by the wrong kind of laughter. The kind that happens when people don't know whether they're allowed to be horrified, so they settle for amused. Sophia didn't hesitate. She lifted her glass, smiling into it. "Don't stay long," she said lightly. "I know this level of success must be exhausting for you to witness up close." There it was, the line from the hook, except worse in person because of how casually she delivered it. I felt something inside me go strangely still. Not shattered, not broken, just very, very clear. My father looked pleased with himself. "You can't blame us for worrying," he continued. "Every family has one child who mistakes independence for drifting." That sentence might have landed a year earlier, maybe even 6 months earlier. But I had spent too much of my adult life building quiet things, knowledge, legal ownership, carefully documented history, to let two insecure people convince me I was the unfinished one. So instead of flinching, I smiled. Not warmly, not bitterly, just enough to make Sophia narrow her eyes. What neither of them understood was that the cabin she had just mentioned in Vermont, casually, possessively, as if it were part of the family brand package, wasn't theirs. It had never really been theirs. My grandmother had left it to me specifically, and she had done so because she knew exactly what kind of people her son and granddaughter were when no one was watching. She used to say, "The only person in this family who knows the value of a thing is the one no one bothers to flatter." At the time, I thought she meant books and paintings and furniture. Years later, I realized she meant leverage. That cabin had become a stage for the two of them. My father had hosted discreet business weekends there, presenting it to investors like an extension of his stability. Sophia had used it for private brand retreats and invitation-only influencer gatherings, the kind that looked effortless online but hid panic attacks worth of logistics underneath. Neither of them paid the taxes. Neither of them handled the maintenance. Neither of them seemed especially interested in the legal language that made the place mine. They only cared that I had been quiet enough to let them behave, as if inheritance worked by personality. So while they kept talking, while my father compared Sophia's real ambition to what he called my taste for obscurity, I stopped hearing insult and started hearing evidence. Every cutting remark went into place like a file being indexed. Every assumption they made about my weakness became useful. Then Sophia leaned toward me, lowering her voice just enough to make it worse. "Be honest, Elena," she said. "Doesn't it ever embarrass you? Walking into rooms like this and knowing you'll never be the person anyone is actually waiting for. That would have destroyed me once. Instead, I looked at her and thought, you really have no idea how dependent your life is on things you never bothered to understand. You'd be surprised, I said. My father gave a short laugh. That sounds almost threatening. No, I said, lifting my spoon and finally taking a bite of dessert. Just observant. For the first time that night, neither of them spoke immediately. It was small, but I felt it, the first hairline crack in their certainty. And right then, I made the decision fully, completely, without the softness of doubt. I was done being the family sacrifice arranged decoratively at the edge of the table. If the people closest to me saw my competence as a threat, then maybe it was time they learned what happened when that threat stopped being polite. What do you do when the people who share your blood see your success not as something to celebrate, but as something to use until they can humiliate you again? I already knew my answer. You stop asking to be loved correctly. You start closing doors legally. I left the table the moment coffee was served. Not dramatically. I didn't throw a napkin down. I didn't announce my pain. I simply rose, excused myself, and walked into the darkened library that connected the conservatory to the main house. The room was almost entirely still, lit only by a pair of brass lamps and the dying glow from the fireplace. It was the only room in that house that had ever felt remotely honest to me. Maybe because books are less exhausting than people who've learned how to smile while they diminish you. My phone was already in my hand before I sat down. I called Michael Shaw, the only person outside my therapist who knew exactly how tangled my relationship with that family had become. Michael wasn't family, wasn't a former boyfriend, wasn't anything complicated. Just my closest friend from graduate school, and now an estate attorney in New York who had, over the years, become the person I trusted when I needed both compassion and terrifying clarity. He picked up on the second ring. You sound like you're calling from inside a very expensive murder mystery, he said. I'm at New Year's dinner, I answered. That bad? They invited me to mock me in person. So yes. His voice softened immediately. Tell me. I did. Not all the details, just enough. The pity line, Sophia's sneer, my father making me the after-dinner entertainment. When I was done, there was a short silence on the line. Then the kind of careful question only someone who really knows you can ask. What are you trying not to say, Elena? I looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, I could see the dark shapes of bare winter branches moving against the night. I want to sell the cabin, I said. There, spoken aloud, it felt both brutal and clean. Michael didn't rush to fill the silence, which is one of the reasons I trust him. Because it's valuable, he said finally. Or because it's the last place in this family that still hurts when you think about losing it. That hit exactly where it should have. The cabin was the last place I had ever been happy with them. Or maybe more accurately, happy before I understood them. My grandmother teaching me to split kindling. Summer mornings on the dock, books stacked by the window. A world that had once felt simple because she was still alive to keep it that way. Selling it would mean cutting more than property loose. It would mean accepting that nostalgia is not a strategy and memory is not a legal defense. I think, I said slowly, I'm tired of using sentiment to subsidize people who would humiliate me for sport. That, Michael said, sounds like the first honest thing anyone said to you tonight. I let out a breath that almost became a laugh. Can I do it quickly? Yes. Especially because it's clean. Title is yours, not shared, no trust complication. The question isn't whether you can. It's whether you're ready for what happens when they realize you're serious. I thought about my father's face when he said he'd invited me out of pity. Sophia's expression when she asked whether I was embarrassed by existing near them. I think they've confused access with entitlement for a very long time. That's not an answer. It is tonight. He was quiet a moment, then shifted into professional mode. We talked through what mattered. The buyer Michael knew who had been looking for a private Vermont property with no public fuss. The possibility of a fast sale if I was willing to price for speed instead of sentiment. The secondary issue, which was almost as important as the first, joint expense accounts still tied to my name from years of convenience. The cards my father and Sophia used for cabin supplies, utilities, event reimbursements. All of it routed through structures they barely noticed because I had always cleaned up the edges. Michael reminded me I could close what was mine. Not destroy, not tamper, close. When I ended the call, I sat there with my phone in both hands and felt grief move through me in one clean wave. This wasn't the thrill of revenge. It was the ache of finally choosing freedom over the last object that still connected me to the version of family I'd wanted to believe in. Would you burn the final bridge to the people who hurt you if it meant you'd never have to crawl back across it again? I didn't know what other people would choose. I only knew what I was about to choose. I stood, returned to the conservatory, and found them exactly where I'd left them, relaxed, entertained, careless. My father looked up first. "There you are," he said. "We thought you'd fled." "No," I said, taking my seat with a calm that startled even me. "I just needed a quiet room to make a decision." Sophia gave me a bored smile. "Should we be worried?" I looked at both of them and said, "Yes." The room changed instantly, not because I raised my voice. I didn't, but because there are certain tones people only recognize when they've spent their lives abusing softer ones. My father put down his glass. Sophia's smile stayed in place a second too long, then slipped. "What exactly is that supposed to mean?" my father asked. I folded my napkin and set it beside my plate. "It means I'm selling the cabin." If I'd thrown a lit match onto the tablecloth, the reaction couldn't have been more immediate. Sophia inhaled sharply. My father's entire posture locked. One of the guests actually looked away, as if eye contact might make them complicit. "That's not funny," Sophia said first. And what struck me most was not anger. It was fear. "I'm not joking." My father leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. "That cabin is family property." "No," I said. "It's family mythology. Legally, it's mine." He opened his mouth to object, but he knew better. He'd signed the probate papers. He'd seen the deed. He'd just spent years behaving as though confidence could overwrite documentation. "You wouldn't dare," he said. That line almost made me smile. Wouldn't dare, as if courage were still the question. "I already have," I replied. "I made the call tonight." Sophia stood so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor. "Elena, stop. Stop being insane for 5 seconds and think. That property isn't just some random asset. People are booked there. I have spring clients." "Then perhaps," I said, "you should have considered that before treating the owner like a family mascot you could humiliate in public." My father rose more slowly, but he was angrier than Sophia in a colder way, which meant more dangerous. "You vindictive little fool. Do you have any idea what you're interfering with?" Finally, there it was. Not grief, not outrage over lost memories, money. "A financing arrangement?" I asked. His expression changed just enough to confirm it. I had suspected, but not known. Now I knew. He had been using the cabin as an informal showpiece while trying to secure a new round of funding for one of his business expansions. Not a direct collateral structure, perhaps, but close enough to make its loss humiliating and materially damaging. He had built confidence around an asset he didn't own. Very Thomas Vance. Sophia, on the other hand, shifted tactics instantly. Tears filled her eyes so fast they almost deserved applause. "You're doing this because you hate us," she said loudly, "for the benefit of everyone listening. Because you can't stand seeing anyone else happy." "No," I said. "I'm doing this because you've both mistaken my patience for permission." She actually laughed through the tears, a brittle, disbelieving sound. "You think this makes you powerful?" "No," I answered. "I think legal authority makes me powerful. This just makes that visible." My father slammed one hand against the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. "If you do this, don't expect to remain part of this family." That would have hurt once too. But threats lose force when they offer to take away what has already been withheld for years. "You invited me here out of pity," I reminded him. "Sophia called me a failure. You both made it very clear what my place is." I'm simply adjusting my assets to match your honesty." Sophia's tears vanished. In their place came something uglier. "You miserable, jealous." "Careful," I said quietly. "Or what?" I held her gaze. "Or I start saying out loud why you really need that cabin so badly." That landed. Her face lost color. Because unlike my father, whose need was ego tied to money, Sophia's need was more fragile. I knew enough. Through one of those accidental family leaks that happen when people assume you're invisible, to understand she had been using the cabin for off-book client hospitality tied to a campaign already under internal review at her firm. Nothing scandalous enough to be criminal, plenty compromising enough to be career-damaging if the wrong person started asking why certain private strategy retreats never appeared in official expense records. My father turned to her, surprised. "What is she talking about?" "Nothing," Sophia shot back. "She's bluffing." But she didn't sound like she believed it. I reached into my bag then, not for drama, but because I had made one more decision while I sat in that library. Before returning, I had opened my phone, set it to record, and tucked its screen down into my clutch. Not because I planned to post it, not because I needed content, because after years of being treated like the unstable one, I wanted the truth preserved in their own voices for once. My father stepped closer. "Listen to me very carefully. You will call whoever you called, and you will stop this tonight." "No." Sophia came around the table, not crying now, furious. "Do you know what people will say when they hear you sold Grandma's cabin to strangers? Do you understand how disgusting that makes you look?" I stood to. "That depends who tells the story first." Her eyes flicked involuntarily to my bag. "Good. Let her wonder." My father's tone turned icy. "If you walk out of here with this plan, I will make sure you never use this family's name, contacts, or support again." I almost pitied him then. A man so used to inherited deference that he still believed exile worked as a punishment on people who had already survived neglect. "You can keep the name," I said. "I'll keep the deed." Then I picked up my coat and left them standing there. Him enraged, her unraveling. Both of them finally understanding that the person they had invited to humiliate had spent the entire evening measuring precisely how much damage their contempt had left exposed. The hook they thought they had over me was love. The real hook had always been paperwork. The next 7 days were the cleanest week of my adult life. Emotionally brutal and logistically efficient. That was the only way I could survive them. The morning after the dinner, I met Michael's buyer by video call. A widowed novelist named Margaret Price, 62, practical, unbothered by Vance family mythology, and more interested in whether the lake froze cleanly in January than in any sentimental speech I might have made. She had wanted a retreat property for years, somewhere private enough to write and near enough to town for emergencies. She loved the library wall, the dock, the old stone fireplace. She did not care whose name the place once carried. I liked her instantly for that alone. We moved fast. Price was set for discretion. Inspection was waived except for the essentials, because she was buying the piece, not the fantasy. Every document Michael sent over felt like a blade cutting through old illusions. Title confirmation, sale agreement, tax allocation, transfer timeline. I signed electronically from my apartment in Boston with a cup of coffee at my elbow, and my grandmother's photograph turned face down on the desk, because I couldn't bear to look at her while I did it. Not because I was ashamed, because I missed her too much. Every time I signed, a memory rose with it. Summer on the dock, reading by the stove. Sophia at 16 sneering because Grandma trusted me with the keys and not her. My father calling the property, the family cabin, in public while privately reminding me not to be difficult whenever I questioned how much he was using it for business entertaining. One signature for every compromise I had mistaken for peace. And then there were the accounts. This was the part outsiders always misunderstand in stories like this. They imagine revenge as one dramatic act. In reality, the deeper power usually sits in administrative structures no one glamorous bothers to learn. Over the years, because the cabin was legally mine and because my father and Sophia found all administrative tasks beneath them, Various expense accounts and reimbursement lines had remained tied to entities under my authority. Utility autopays, maintenance retainers, event deposit cards. A family shared convenience account originally created to simplify property expenses that had gradually metastasized into a hidden support system for their habits. They assumed it was permanent because I had never forced them to notice it. I didn't touch a cent that wasn't mine. I didn't falsify anything. I simply closed what I had legal authority to close first. The shared cabin expense account, then the linked credit cards authorized under it, then the reimbursement card Sophia used for hospitality prep, then the reserve line my father dipped into when vendor bills ran ahead of his liquidity. Each closure triggered notices the bank would send in its own time. Each closure meant there would be no more invisible cushion between their lifestyle and its consequences. Michael advised me to keep everything immaculate. No theatrics, he said. Let institutions do the speaking. He was right. On day 4, the sale formally cleared. On day 5, the proceeds landed. I sat staring at the number in my account and felt none of the triumph people imagine money brings in moments like this. What I felt was lighter and stranger, the absence of dread. For the first time in years, there was no inherited asset tethering me to their access. No family place I had to preserve while being mocked by the people using it. No future weekend where I would be expected to arrive, smile, subsidize, and leave. On day 6, I learned something else that made the entire thing even sharper. Through a museum donor who knew someone in Sophia's circle. Wealthy people gossip with astonishing efficiency. I heard that Sophia had been quietly scrambling to explain to a major client why a private Vermont strategic retreat venue she had floated as a perk was suddenly unavailable. Worse, one of the buyers my father had been courting for a partnership had asked about a summer weekend at the cabin. Assuming it was part of the lifestyle package Thomas had implied surrounded his operation. That possibility was gone now. Not because I exposed him publicly, because he had built perceived stability on property he did not own. That was the real lesson of the week. I wasn't destroying their lives. I was removing my name from the scaffolding. By day 7, I knew the first statements and notices would be arriving. Account closure confirmations, late payment flags no longer cushioned by reserve transfers, reversed assumptions. The phrase "their money was gone" wasn't entirely literal. Of course they still had money. What was gone was the hidden structure that made them feel richer, safer, and more in control than they actually were. And the most satisfying part? They knew something was happening, but not all of it. My father called 3 times. Sophia called 9. Voicemails ranged from threats to bargaining to carefully worded outrage dressed up as concern. I saved everyone. I responded to none. Some people think revenge is loud. My favorite kind is administrative. It arrives in white envelopes, bank notifications, and the dawning realization that the person you treated like a footnote was in fact your buffer against reality all along. The bank statements began arriving on a Tuesday. My father called first at 7:12 a.m., which told me 2 things immediately. He had seen the notices himself, and for once he had not been able to bury the panic beneath a day's worth of false composure. I let the first 2 calls go to voicemail. On the 3rd, I answered. "What did you do?" he demanded, without greeting, without hesitation, without even pretending this was a misunderstanding. I stood in my kitchen looking out at the gray Boston morning and poured myself coffee before responding. "Good morning to you too. Do not play games with me, Elena. The Vermont expense account is closed. The reserve line is gone. 2 cards were terminated. Statements are showing outstanding balances that should have been covered days ago. What did you do?" I took a sip. "I closed accounts connected to property I sold." He actually stopped breathing for a second. "Then you sold it?" "Yes." "You stupid vindictive." He cut himself off, probably because anger wasn't working and he knew it. "Elena, listen carefully. That sale must be reversed. Sales don't work that way. You have damaged ongoing business." "No," I said. "You did that when you built business expectations on my property." The silence on the line this time was full of rage, too dense for language. Then he lowered his voice. Do you understand what you've cost me? There it was again. Not what I'd cost the family, not what I'd done to memory or legacy. More than you plan to admit to me, apparently. He exploded then, accusations, disloyalty, insanity. A final line that almost sounded theatrical in its desperation. You will die alone if this is how you treat your own blood. That was always the final weapon in families like mine. Not reason, not accountability, but fear of abandonment. The curse they place on the child who finally stops volunteering to be consumed. I waited until he finished and said very quietly, "Then at least I'll die with my name off your paperwork." I hung up. Sophia arrived 2 hours later in person, because of course she did. She never trusted distance to do the work of manipulation when beauty and performance might still manage it live. She looked wrecked in a polished way. Hair perfect, face pale, sunglasses too large, fury vibrating just under the surface. I let her into the lobby of my building, but not my apartment. "You ruined everything," she said the second the doors closed behind her. "Good morning, Sophia." "Don't." She stepped closer. "Do you know what landed on my desk today? Reimbursement reversals, account closures, questions about prior hospitality expenses. My firm is already asking why I used a private location no longer available through family connections. Do you understand what this looks like? Like a professional who should have documented her arrangements more carefully." Her mouth tightened. "You think this is funny?" "No. I think it's overdue." For a second, I thought she might slap me. Instead, she laughed, but it came out cracked and ugly. "You always wanted this, to watch us fall." That was the lie she needed most. Because if I had always wanted this, then she didn't have to admit she built her sense of superiority on my compliance. "No," I said. "I wanted a family that didn't invite me to dinner out of pity." She looked away first. Then she tried one final tactic. Tears. Not loud, not dramatic. Just enough gloss in the eyes to suggest sisterhood, loss, regret. "Elena," she said softly, "we grew up there." So did I. It was Grandma's. And she left it to me. You can't replace what that meant. "You're right," I said. "Which is why it mattered that you both treated me like dirt while using it." She swallowed. "What do you want from us?" The truth surprised even me, how quickly it came. Nothing. That's the point. Because this is what people misunderstand about release. The final power isn't in making them grovel. It's in no longer needing the apology to proceed. She stared at me a long time. And in that stare I finally saw what I had wanted to see years earlier. Not remorse exactly, but the collapse of certainty. She had truly believed I would keep absorbing everything. The mockery, the admin, the cost, the family myth. And now she was standing in front of me, elegant and frightened, realizing that 1 week was all it had taken for her world to reveal how much of it had been resting on the sister she called a failure. "My firm could fire me," she whispered. I looked at her and thought of the dinner, her laugh, the words, "You're a failure." "Then maybe," I said. "You should have learned earlier not to mistake dependence for superiority." She flinched like I'd struck her. We stood there in silence for a moment more. Then I did one last thing. Not cruel, just precise. I opened my phone, pressed play on the audio file I had recorded that night in the conservatory, and held it where only she could hear. Her own voice, clear as glass. "We only invited you out of pity." My father's threat, her panic, the whole rotten little scene. Her face drained white. "You recorded us?" "I documented my decision-making environment." "That's sick." "No," I said. "It's careful." I stopped the audio and slipped the phone back into my coat pocket. "If either of you keeps threatening me, I become much less sentimental about privacy." That did it. Not because I intended to publish anything, but because she finally understood that the era of me being the family's unguarded target was over. She left without another word. Later that evening, as the city darkened and my apartment settled into quiet, I sat by the window with a blanket around my shoulders and looked at the email confirming the final distribution from the sale. The cabin was gone. The accounts were closed. The statements had arrived. Their money wasn't truly gone. Not every dollar. But the borrowed stability, the hidden access, the confidence they were like inheritance, that was gone. And that was enough. My father invited me to dinner just to mock me. 1 week later, the family cabin was sold, the joint accounts were closed, and the bank statements started arriving. They wanted me to believe I was the failure in the family. What they never understood was that I had been the only reason their version of success held together as long as it did. So tell me this. When family only loves you as long as you stay useful, do you still call it loyalty if you leave? Or do you finally call it freedom? What struck me most about the story is that the deepest betrayal did not come from strangers, but from the people who should have protected Elena the most. Her response was not reckless anger but calm, deliberate self-respect, and that made the ending even more powerful. I think that is what stays with you. What about you? If your own family kept humiliating you, would you walk away quietly, or would you make them face the consequences?